Good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Picardi. Some of you know me, some of you don't. Glad to see some familiar faces and some new faces. Thank you for all for coming. This is put on by the Friends of the DHS Public Library, Desert Hot Springs Library. And this is the first in the series that we're trying out, Meet the Local Authors, of which we have many. And tonight we're starting with Glenn Crowson, who was a city manager and did a number of things, had a lot of background in police work and investigative reporting and things like that. And he's now a resident of Desert Hot Springs with his wife, Linda, who's over here in the red. And again, I want to thank you all for coming. Like I said, this is the first in the series. I can see a lot of you have some goodies that you're eating. There is food available for everyone. And also I want to make a point that we have envelopes at the table over here where you can sign up and become a member. There's different levels to become a member to help support the library. And we have a new library manager, another Linda, who's standing in the back here. And she is working her buns off, quite frankly, to bring this library up to the standards we all deserve. And I think with us working with her, the Friends of the Library working with her, I think we can make the library something we can all be very, very proud of. So I'm kind of done doing the sales pitch. Again, I want to welcome you all, and thank you all for coming out tonight. And I want to introduce Glenn.
Thank you. Before I get started, I just want to say that there's three things that helped me write this book, and it's nonfiction. So I had to do a lot of research in a lot of different places, but the three things that really helped me were museums, newspapers, and libraries. And everywhere I went to do the research, it seems that every one of those agencies were having trouble, financial trouble. The libraries seemed to be struggling. Newspapers, as you all know, are basically going out of business, and museums are also becoming scarce. Anyway, that enough said, and it's nice to be here. Now, I'll tell you something. About 25 years ago, I made my first appearance at this city council meeting. It was a different shape and didn't have stoves and everything, but my first meeting was here at city council meeting. Then the next meeting, they moved over to the behind of the senior center, and then after that, they moved it somewhere else. It was almost like they were trying to move it and see if he could find the next one, if he could go to them. I was a city manager in 2 or 3 other cities before I came to Desert Hot Springs. I had about 15 years of public service that I'd put in, and one of the things that I was most proud of, I had never missed a city council meeting from all the cities that I'd went to. And when I came to Desert Hot Springs, I was proud of that record, and after about 2 years, I did get a flu bug, and I missed the council meeting. And the next day, I got a nice card from the city clerk telling me that they missed me, and that the message was, please get well and hurry back soon, Desert Hot Springs City Council, by a vote of 3-2. I've told that story 100 times in a different city, in a different place, and I enjoy telling it, and I've enjoyed telling stories all my life, and it depends on who you talk to, whether they're true or not. But when I retired, I felt that I needed to do something, and writing was something that I had always done. As a public official, you always write memos or studies or recommendations and agendas and minutes, and I always felt that I could do more than that. So I started writing op-eds for newspapers. I started writing research papers for newspapers, a lot of research papers on the death penalty, a lot of research papers on police consolidations, contracting, and short stories. I entered a lot of short stories contests, and there's 50 of them a day. There's so many of them. You find them, and they'll give you $50 for the best story, or $100, or $10, or a free pencil, or whatever it is. Sometimes the rewards aren't that great, but it was a way to write. And when I tell people that they want to write, then you have to do it. You have to write. And if there's everybody, I've had 3 people already this morning tell me that, or this evening, that there's a novel inside them somewhere, that they've always thought about writing something that's really good. Well, I'll tell you, if you start writing short stories, you start writing letters, you start writing things, and almost every day, always write something. And when you do write that novel, it'll be much, much better than if you just started from scratch. 3 years ago, I had heart surgery. I had a 5-way bypass. And while I was laying on the table there, and the busload of doctors that were there were hanging around, I experienced some type of a out-of-body experience. It wasn't like I was going for the light or anything like that, but I could see different people that I knew a long time ago that had died. I started going through my life from the time I was a toddler until I checked into the hospital. Every little detail, and I don't know how long it lasted. It could have been 10 minutes. It could have been, 5 hours. But one of the things that came to my mind during that time was when I was in high school in 1965, a little girl was abducted off the streets of Brawley, California, 50 years ago. And I always remember that, and I always remember her name was Brenda Sue Sayers. And it was the biggest story ever to hit Brawley. It's the biggest crime that ever hit Brawley. And since then, it's the biggest crime. Imperial Valley claims that was the biggest crime in 1965. And a 10-year-old girl that decided that she was going to go down to her school, which was about 2 blocks from her house, and she had been given a new pair of skates a week before her birthday. It was kind of a pre-birthday gift. And when she left, her mother told her to be back soon because dinner was going to be ready. And that's the last time that anybody in the family saw Brenda Sue. A man named Robert Eugene Pennington promised her that he knew a guy that was going to give her a puppy. So she got in the car with him, and that was the last time anybody except Pennington saw Brenda Sue. It was a big crime, and when I came home from the hospital, I decided, I'm going to research this, and it really stuck in my mind. I was going to find out, and I went on the internet, and I had read all the newspapers, reporters, and all that stuff, and I thought, well, there's got to be something. Whatever happened to that guy? Whatever happened to the family? What happened to the policemen that were investigating this crime? And I went online, and I found a book by Susan Kelly, and she's out of Massachusetts, and she wrote a book called The Boston Stranglers. And she investigated the Boston Strangler murder more extensively than almost anyone. They made a movie out of her book, and in the book, she listed a suspect in the murder of Mary Sullivan, a girl from Boston. And she said that the victim, police attributed her death to Albert DeSalvo. We've all seen the movie, The Boston Strangler, Tony Curtis, the whole works. Well, there was some controversy of whether Albert DeSalvo did all those crimes. He was convicted of 1, not the 7 or 9. And he was never convicted of murdering Mary Sullivan. Mary Sullivan was raped, strangled, and raped with a foreign object, and there was signs of semen on her body. And that was it. I couldn't find anything else about that, but I knew Robert Eugene Pennington was the suspect in the Brenda's case. So it took me about 2 months to finally get a hold of Susan Kelly, and she explained it, where she got her information from. And I told her what I was doing, and she helped me considerably. It was not just so much of getting me information, but helped me as a writer, how to get information from the coroner's office, how to get information from the sheriff or the police. And I did that, and I started investigating every little story. And what I found was that I had a big story, the Brenda Sue murder, and I felt that I could dive into that. But then I found that every time I would look into something, there was another story within the story. And what I looked for were those interesting little stories that were in the book. We know that the main story is Brenda Sue was abducted, but then I started finding out the family, the Sayers family. They had all moved, and there was 12 of them altogether. They had all moved out of Imperial Valley, except one who lived in El Centro. It took me a while to contact everybody, and most of them in the beginning said no, they didn't want to talk about it. And finally, one of the sisters said that she would talk about it, but the mother wasn't interested. And it took me a while, and then I got a phone call one day out of the blue from the mother. She lived up in the high desert. She said, yeah, I'll talk about it. Come on up. So I went up there, sat down with her, her son, and one of her daughters, and she emptied it all. It was like she'd been keeping this inside her for years and years and years. The daughter asked her, why are you saying this? You haven't told us this and since the beginning. And she says, well, it's been 50 years. She says, I feel I had to get it off my chest and I would feel better. And so we sat there all day long. I was writing on everything from matchbooks and papers, and I was asking her for napkins. And it was extremely interesting that she had waited 50 years before she decided to say anything. Of course, I went down to Brawley and started asking questions down there, and I went to the chief of police and told him who I was, and I said, you know, I used to be a policeman here about 40 years ago. And, of course, he looked to me like he was about 17, and he had never heard of me, and he had never heard of Brenda Sue Sayers. I said, you know, there was the largest crime ever hit Brawley. He goes, you know, I haven't had a chance to go back in the history of Brawley. I've only been here for 6 months or so. And I understood that. And then we started looking for the records, and the records were missing. All the records. And I know that there was some big books. They called them murder books, and the paper, and it was gone. All of it was gone. So I had to go through the Sheriff's Department of Riverside County and Imperial County. But I found a couple of the investigators from Brawley that were leading the charge, and I interviewed them, and it was an exciting time for me. It was very interesting to hear what they had to say, and I met some great people from Riverside County Sheriff's Department and from Imperial County Sheriff's. One of the detectives that was assigned this case from Riverside to go all the way down to Imperial County was a guy named Coyce Bird. He was a detective then and found some key evidence down at the crime scene, and the crime scene was in Mecca. That's where the little girl was killed and thrown into one of those big standpipes, dumps that they use down there for irrigation. And Coyce Bird helped me out a lot. He made some phone calls. He got me the names and numbers of a lot of people, the FBI. He was very, very helpful, and I owe him a lot for this book. Riverside County Sheriff, commander of the Indio Station, it was his jurisdiction, was a guy named Dell Fountain. And he was a big, tough guy that didn't take guff of anybody, but he was honest. And he led the charge on this investigation along with the Brawley PD. And each one of these, and then they had the trial, of course, down Brawley, and Brawley was a country town, a good old boy, and they were very agreeable to give this guy a fair trial, and then we're going to hang him. And there was many people down there that would volunteer to do that. And we found out in talking to the people about the trial that in talking to Mr. Sayers' son, Mr. Sayers had passed on, but Mr. Sayers, I asked the son, I said, "Did your dad own any weapons or anything?" And he goes, "No." And his mother, at that, when they were sitting around her table, said, "Yes, he did. He owned a .38, and he took it with him to the first day of the trial, and he put it in his pocket." And he had heard that a person had been set free a couple of years ago down in Imperial County because he shot somebody, and the court ruled that he was too drunk to understand what he did, so they let him go on the first day of the trial. And so a Brawley policeman says, "You told Mr. Sayers, be warned, they may let him go on that first day." So he carried a gun with him in his front pocket, and the newspaper said, as Mr. Sayers testified, and as he left the witness chair, he stopped in front of Pennington and put his hands in his pocket and stared at him, and then moved on. Well, we knew what he was doing with his hands in his pocket. And I wrote that, and that came out in the book. And since then, I've gone to quite a few of the book signings and stuff in Imperial County. And I have 3 other witnesses that know of people that carried guns into that first day of the trial. That was it's a different time zone, even 50 years ago, than we have now. I can't even get in there with my keys. I can't. The courthouse here. And but for some reason, there was 4 people that were able to carry guns inside that courthouse. They had a society down there, good old boys, and they had what they call the red dot policy. They took a bunch of rocks and put a red dot on one of them, shook it up, and these men in this group would all pick one. And I heard this from 2 different people that were there during the selection of the red dot. And the person that got the red dot wasn't anonymous. Nobody knew who he was, but he was responsible for killing Pennington if Pennington got off the trial. And I heard it from 3 different people, and we still don't know who got the red dot, but we do know that the ceremony took place. So there's so many of the little stories that, especially on the law enforcement side, that we have wanted to bring out, and they're in the book. How the community was basically frozen in time during this time, searching for Brenda, searching for Brenda's slayer, and during the trial. The line around the courthouse for the trial was 300 or 400 in a 200-chair courthouse. The Bracero program had just ended a week before down in Imperial County. We explained the Bracero program, and then the Braceros that were working walked home, walked to Mexico. So you couldn't go by a street, the main streets. It looked like a line of people who was walking home. And, of course, many people thought that's where the killer came from, the Braceros. So there was a lot of racial attacks on Braceros, looking for different people. There seemed to be no such thing as a search warrant. The fire department told me that they went door to door and searched people's houses, whether they would like them to or not. And if they didn't want us to come in there, they called the police, and the police went in there. But they went door to door in 1/4 of the city. They sectioned out 1/4 of the city. It was, I can remember my dad volunteering and going down to look in the brush and these old buildings down by the railroad tracks. I also remember my mom cooking stuff, sandwiches and coffee and cookies, taking them down to the command center that they had set up. And there are so many stories in this that I wish I could tell you, but because of time, we're going to cut this down here in a minute. And there was a captain, I mentioned him, Del Fountain of Indio Station. And he was a big, tough guy and took no guff from anybody. And when the FBI apprehended Pennington in Indiana, Dale Fountain went back with 2 other officers to fly Pennington back to India. And then after they got back there the next day, Dale Fountain held a press conference and said, Pennington is afraid to fly, so we're not going to fly him back, we're going to drive him back. And the FBI had told him, they said, we have him, he hasn't confessed or anything, but you're welcome to come get him. They did. Dale Fountain and 2 other officers went down there to pick him up, and Dale Fountain gave this press conference that Pennington was afraid to fly, so they're going to have to drive him back. And I talked to somebody that used to work for Dale Fountain, a couple of people. One of them was a lady that now lives over in Cathedral City. She's a beautiful lady that spent some time, couple of days with me going over Dale Fountain's biography. And she told me, she said, Dale Fountain wouldn't have cared less whether that guy could afraid to fly or not. If they wanted to, he'd have shoved him in the baggage compartment. So they drove back. It took them 4 days to drive from Indiana to Indio, and they got 3 confessions out of him on the trip back.
3 different ones?
Yeah, 3 different ones of 3 different crimes. There was one quick story about an officer that this gentleman in L.A. was a graphic artist, and he wasn't making any money. He was a starving graphic artist, and somebody told him that you can become a police officer and make more money than what you're doing now. So that's what he did. He became a police officer, and a year after being on the force, he got called to a domestic dispute, and sure enough, the husband comes out blazing with guns, shoots his partner, kills his partner immediately, and then shoots the graphic artist. His name was Hector Garcia. Shoots him, and it hits him right in the eye, but it doesn't kill him. And as the husband is leaving, Hector had enough strength and courage, I guess, to get up, shoot the husband, and kill the husband. Hector couldn't see anymore. He had to wear a big black patch over his eye. But the LAPD took good care of him. They gave him desk jobs. Hector got involved with some drugs and alcohol because of his handicap. And they went to Hector and said, hey, how about becoming a sketch artist? You had that background. So he did. And he became the world's most famous police sketch artist. He did it for, although he worked for LAPD, he did work for Scotland Yard, New York Police Department. Remember the Hillside Strangler in Los Angeles? Well, he's the one that came up with that identified. 2 days after Brenda was abducted, there was no clues, and they had no idea what was going on, who was doing this. And there was a 10-year-old girl that thought she saw the man talking to Brenda. And they tried the little sketch things where you put the eyes out, then the nose, and then the mouth. Oh, that didn't work. That 10-year-old girl couldn't understand that. And the 10-year-old girl was Hispanic and didn't understand a lot of English. So somebody called Hector Garcia. And on his own, he came down to Brawley, met with the little girl, and in 3 hours gave a sketch that went in the newspaper the next day, and within 2 hours of the newspapers going out, they identified the man from that sketch. And so that little girl and Hector were a real benefit to this case. The trial was another thing that has a multitude of little stories in it. I talked to a jurist. The lone surviving jurist her name is Arona Ferris. I called her. Her number was still in the book, and I called her and I said, and I talked to her daughter and I told her who I was, what I wanted to do, and her daughter says, "Oh, you have the wrong name because my mother would never served on a jury like that, and she's retired now, and so go peddle your thing somewhere else." And I thought, okay. So 2 days later, I get a call back from the same daughter saying, it was my mother. She admitted that she served on that jury. So the next day I was in Hopeville, knocking on her door and sitting there with her daughter and her. And the daughter said, "Mom, why didn't you tell us about this? You went 50 years and not telling." She says it was so heartbreaking to see the evidence, to see the pictures of that little girl, and then to sit 10 feet away from that guy during this 2-month trial. And so she said, I hadn't said anything to anybody for 50 years. The same story that I got from Mrs. Sayers. Anyway, they had a surprise ending on the trial. I hope that you get a chance to read the book, and you'll see what. And I've talked to judges. I've talked to his attorney, who's a retired judge in San Diego now. Nice man, and it's the little stories within the stories that made this thing interesting to me. I was devoted to this thing. I worked every day, and anywhere I went, if I went to Joshua Tree for dinner, I would go to the phone book or go pull the phone book out and look up the names that I was still missing and I couldn't find. And it helped me once. And after a year, I got the name of Pennington's daughter, who was molested by Pennington when she was 11 years old. And I talked to her. She worked in Southern California. She did not want to have anything to do with me. She did not want to have anything to do with my book. And I was at a dead end. When she said that, I didn't know what to do. Then she said, "You can call my brother. He may help you." I said, "Well, what was his number again?" And I got that number and called him. And he came all the way down and met in my office over on 8th Street here in Desert Hot Springs. And we sat there for 2 to 3 hours. And he gave me information that showed why Pennington did this. And it was a fascinating thing, especially when he walked in my office there on 8th Street, and he looked just like Hector Garcia's sketch. Wow. He was the same age as his father was when his father committed the crime. And for a year and a half, I've been doing computer work with that sketch right on a bulletin board right in front of me. And when he walked in, it was like all my hairs went on end. And it was totally amazing. It fascinated me, and he had never seen a picture of his father. He had never seen a picture of his mother. We showed him pictures. We showed him the sketches. We showed him all these things. And that was the first he had really heard about the case, is when he got the information from me. And that was a pretty scary time. And I didn't quite understand how he was going to react to this. But we haven't heard from him since. But we know that we've done some research on him, and we did find out that since the book was published, we found out that his son died. The grandson of Pennington died in prison. So. Wow. I could go on and on all night. My timer is setting there. She hasn't said anything. I would like to answer questions if anybody has any.
I was just going to.
How much time did he get, or did they hang him?
Pardon?
I have to read the book to find out if they hung him.
Well, I don't think it'd be fair to people that haven't read the book. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any theories on why the books in Brawley were missing on this murder?
Well, it was a very. I think they became collector's items, and people would take them. Cops took them. Clerks took them. People that were dealing with the case took them, and trying to get information is not, from 50 years ago, is not that easy anymore, because files at different departments, you got to remember what departments have done with their files over the last 50 years. They've copied them, they've tabulated them, they probably put them on discs, probably put them on CDs, they probably, microfished them. They've done everything, and they just don't last as long. Now, I had an investigator for the Brawley PD, John Santos, told me that he thought a clerk at the police department took them and gave them to friends and different. But and we haven't heard anything, so I don't know. And the book is very well known in Imperial County, and we've had a lot of people come up and tell me their story after the book has come up about the guns in the trial and all that stuff. But we haven't heard where they're at. Yes, sir.
How many people have come up to you and said, "Hey, that isn't true. I did this, or I did that," or have you had?
I only have one. I got an email from Pennington's niece, who told me that I was stupid and didn't know what I was talking about. And at the back of the book, if somebody told me they didn't want their name in the book, I made up a fictitious name. Like Pennington's son, I made up a fictitious name and a fictitious address. I didn't say anything. I named his sister, the one that was molested, but I didn't give her name or where she was working or anything. That wasn't my purpose. The niece emailed me and told me that there was never anybody named Pennington with a first name of Charles down there. Well, of course not, because we changed the name, and all the Penningtons had to leave Imperial County. They were under threats that they couldn't stand down there, and they moved on. They moved on mostly to San Jacinto and Hemet area, but their family background was a lot of criminal activity, and so it's I've never had anybody tell me that and because everything in here, remember, we researched it. I can lock myself up in a cabin up in Idaho and write a novel, and I don't need to do anything. But if you write nonfiction, you better have stuff to back you up. Take insurance out, libel insurance, and all this other. And the only thing I left out of the book was the graphic details of the little girl's death. Her mother asked me to do that, so I did that. We have his confession in there, verbatim, but it's we edited part of it.
When was the murder, and what year, and when were you talking to Coyce Bird?
Well, I was talked to Coyce Bird in the last few years, while I was writing the book in the last couple of years. Coyce Bird was a detective for the Riverside County Sheriff in 1965. And when the body was found, it was found in a standpipe. They didn't immediately know that was Brenda, although Brenda had been missing for some days. An irrigator named Avila found the body when the water flow was disrupted in one of the standpipes. And so he pulled back then they had wooden covers. He pulled the wooden cover, saw the body, called the sheriff, and the sheriffs thought they had a homicide of somebody from Riverside County, so they pulled everybody down here. And then,
Well, I went to high school with him, so
Did you?
it's really funny to hear his name.
did you ever see him at all?
No, but I mean, was he retired is he still working or what?
Oh, now he's retired. He became, after detective, he went on to become sheriff of the county, and he's retired now, and him and his wife travel around on motorcycles, and they're having a great old time. He'll call. I've had more than one of these book presentations, and he was there at the one in Temecula. Him and his wife came by. He's quite a guy, and I always remember that I said, I'm looking for a picture of Dell Fountain, and he goes, Dell had a brother, and I said, well, maybe his brother had something. He goes, just go take a picture of his brother. They were twins. But any other questions that somebody may have?
All told, how much time did it take you to write this book? I mean, from the time you started till, you had it in your hands.
2.5 years. Mostly research. And the last part was the writing. That was the easy part. And, the last few months was, to me, the hardest part. And that was sending it to an editor and having it returned with all kind of marks all over it, and green marks, red marks, blue marks. And I rewrite it, send it back, and here it would come back again. And eventually, finally, I think that they were editing the same things that they had edited the first time. So that was very severe blow to my ego to have it edited like that, and have somebody that's probably 17 telling me how to write this. But I've learned a lot, and it was. I have a new book coming out this year, and it's called Death in India. After I left Desert Hot Springs, I went to work for a community service district down in Thermal and Mecca, and it's a law enforcement district, and we contract with the Riverside County Sheriffs. One of the former sergeants is right there. Geronimo was Contreras, and he's with the Riverside County Sheriff's Department. And one of the deputies, one of the sergeants that I was assigned to then, was a guy named Sal Pena. And Sal was a fascinating guy, very funny, very friendly. And I remember coming to Desert Hot Springs in my first year here. I would go down Palm Drive, and it was only 2 lanes then. It took you about an hour to go from here to the freeway. And over on the left-hand side was a billboard. And it was one of those that information leading to the discovery of this person. And, it's one of those big ones. And on that billboard was this picture of this beautiful young girl, about 24 years old. And I couldn't help but notice that billboard as you drive by. I mean, this picture, this girl was just like a movie star. And she was missing because she left Phoenix, and she was heading toward Los Angeles, and she never made Los Angeles, driving a light blue Volkswagen. And nobody ever found her car. Nobody ever found her. And while I was in transfer, 6 years later, I was down at the district talking to Sal Pena, the former detective. That was his case. And he started telling me about the case, and it took him 2 years to solve that case. But he did. It was very famous, made America's Most Wanted and all that. And he kept telling me about this case over and over and over again. And I thought, well, that may be a pretty good book. And so I did more research, and I found out that the story really started in Texas before they discovered her body in India, and with some police officers that were doing some shaky things. And then they discovered her body here, and it took 2 years to trace down parts of a Volkswagen. And it was no fluke, no America's Most Wanted. It was pure, hard police work that did this. And Sal, I'm going to make Sal famous.
So that's the new book.
And that's the case. And Sal solved the crime after 2 years, and that's what the next book is that we're writing right now, Death in India. So.
Great. Does it have lots of side stories too, or is this one more?
Yeah,
focused
lots
on-
of side stories, and we've already discovered and been warned to be careful on some of the side stories, because investigating maybe a bent, I'm not calling them crooked cops, but a bent cop in Waxahachie, Texas is different than investigating someone here in Thermal, California. They're a little good old boy. You talk about the good old boys of Imperial County. They are real good old boys back there. And so we've been back there. We've been back to Yukon, Oklahoma, which was the home of the girl that was murdered. And we've talked to their family and friends. We've talked to some detectives back in Waxahachie, and in Beaumont, Texas, where this case originated from, where we think it originated from, and we were stumbled. I've been writing this book for a long time, but one of the suspects that was convicted asked for an appeal and got a special appeal, and so when I asked for information from the courts or the sheriff's department or from the FBI or from Arizona PD, they refused to give me that because there was still chance of appeal of her going to trial. Well, her appeal ended, and the good news is her appeal ended. The bad news is she was paroled. So there's more to this than that's kind of still going on. And anyway, that's our next book, Murder in India. So, any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Well, how do you work? I mean, do you get up at 3 in the morning? Do you use Post-its? Do you do everything by hand? Do you use...
Well, when I was writing this, when I was really into this, it didn't matter. I'd be up at 3 o'clock in the morning if something hit me. I'd be waiting for a phone call. I would take my little computer along. We went to the prisons in North Dakota. We went to the prisons in Iowa to get information. He murdered a girl right before he murdered Brenda in Fresno. We were up there looking at where he dumped that body in the car. Sometimes I would write until I couldn't write anymore.
I mean, by hand? Or
No, it was on a word processor, the word, and we it was just so much information, and it seemed like for a while there when I was really getting in, the fax machines back then and emails and stuff now, but talking to people from the FBI agent from Arizona on the phone for 2 hours, my wife would 3 o'clock in the morning she'd notice I wasn't there, and I'd be in my little fort, I call it, writing my little speech, and we had it's always the story within the story that's going to be interesting, and I don't know how else I can explain it, but it's the finding the information. It was probably the most energizing thing to me. It was like I was a detective. Like I was going out interviewing people, and many people told me to get the hell out of their house. But you just have to ask, and you hope that they'll come through. And when enough people know what you're doing, they'll help you out, and they'll say, "Well, I know a guy that does this, so maybe it'll help you too."
So you were young when this crime
I was in
happened.
high school.
In high school, and then did you live near Brawley?
I lived in Brawley.
In Brawley. So you hadn't really thought about it through the years until that one incident.
I knew about it. It happened. Of course, everybody knew about it. But I really didn't. Everybody knew about it in Brawley, but nothing that really. I didn't research it or anything. I was a policeman in Brawley for about a little over 3 years, and I remember pulling the file and looking at the file and putting the file back. That's how I know that there was a file, but we never had a chance to sit down and go through it. But we talked about it, especially us younger guys that lived there. But it wasn't until 4 years ago when I had the surgery that it really came to light that this is what I was going to write about.
It was in your subconscious while you were in that hospital.
Maybe, yeah.
Spiritual awakening.
Yeah.
All right.
It really was.
Cool.
Can
All
I
right.
ask one more?
Sure.
The fact that Pennington's son has never seen pictures of him.
That's right.
How would
Yeah, I didn't
how
understand
would
that.
He must
you
have been
not ever
estranged.
see a picture of your father?
Well, they were divorced when he was a little child.
So he
And-
wasn't around.
He wasn't around, no. The only time he came back was to molest his daughter. And his son was there in the same trailer when his daughter was
I
molested.
see. Okay, I
And,
understand now.
And the Riverside County Sheriff's Department arrested Pennington. They got the call and they went out and found him, arrested him, charged him with child molestation, and they convicted him. And he was a convicted child molester. And the judge decided that, well, I want to know how much of a threat he is to society. After he molested his own daughter, how much of a threat he is. And so the judge sends him to a Tascadero, a hospital up in Tascadero. And he'd been there for about 3 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks. And he asked for a pass to go outside and sit in the grass. They gave him one. And I haven't seen him since. He walked and he escaped from Missouri State Prison. The guy's a perpetual criminal, and they were letting him walk around. And when he was in Iowa, that he told the guards that he had a stomach ache real bad. He had to go to a doctor, and they sent him to the doctor's office outside the prison walls because it was more serious than what they had dealt with. And he told the doctor, he says, "Doctor, I got to go to the bathroom. If you don't let me go to the bathroom, I'm going to go right here on your floor." And the doctor said, "Go, it's right down there, down the hall to your right." They never saw him again. So it's, and Dale Fountain is the one that we have in his report that he told the detectives that were coming with him from Indiana back, "Don't take your eyes off him. He'll kill you in a minute and not give a damn."
What has all this research done to your view of human nature, or?
Well, well, I remember how this crime affected that little town and that family, and every one of those sisters of Brenda's say it affected their lives, and not in a positive way. And I've remember how that town came to a standstill, and now it's almost commonplace that we see this every day. We see it in L.A. and the Amber Alert is almost constantly going off, and so I'm a strong believer in capital punishment. I'm a strong believer in incarcerations, and of course that's not what we're here talking about. I wrote a lot of stories in the Desert Sun and for them about capital punishment, but I don't feel that there is a safe enough rehabilitation process for everybody, and it's very, very, very scary how many people are walking around the streets now that have. I still see it when I was down at the district. They would catch somebody that was a sexual molester that just been released, and where'd you catch them? You catch them right down there at the Mecca Elementary School, hanging around. So it's very, very scary.
Prop 47.
Yeah.
Okay,
Any others?
I think we're good.
All right.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn.
You bet.
Just